Let's jump right into around the league. And I'm going to start with one. Alonzo Highsmith found his high jumper in college, and he recommended to the Packers. They draft him. They did. Now Donald Driver's playing in his first Super Bowl. Donald, who had his incredible story. He sold drugs. He stole cars, lived in a U-Haul with his brother. Now his brother's a priest, and Donald's one of the men of the year every year in Green Bay. What do you think about Driver and his contributions to the Packers?
You know, it's just an awesome story. And when I think of Donald Driver, not only do I think about him on the field, like you mentioned, what he's doing off the field, the Donald Driver Foundation, which takes place here in Houston. And he's just a great story. He's a great role model for kids to look up to. And at 35, he's going to his first Super Bowl. It'll be an awesome story for him to get his first ring. And you know, it's as a hometown guy, as a Houston guy, he is somebody you root for.
Now, I know you got a lot of things going you like about the Steelers.
Yeah, about the Steelers, about the one thing I do want to touch on is the guy who didn't make it to the Super Bowl, and that's Jay Cutler. And I want to take this time to say that he's getting some unfair criticism out there. I'm not a Jay Cutler fan. You know how I feel about quarterbacks. I don't like any of them. And this guy, to get the criticism that he's receiving from other players for not finishing the game, it's just unreal. It's ludicrous to me. And the owners are probably sitting there laughing, knowing that they're about to have these labor negotiations and you're supposed to have a unified front. And the teams, the NFL Brotherhood, can't even stick together to support a guy who was hurt or supposedly wasn't hurt when he got kicked out of his last game. So I just really think that unless you know what Jay Cutler was feeling, you can't speak and say that he gave up, because we all know how these injuries feel. And it's just surprising to me that other players were taking shots at him. It's one thing for fans who always play Monday morning quarterback to say Jay Cutler should have finished the game, but players who've been injured and know what it feels, what it means to be injured, to take shots at him, it's just unacceptable.
Especially Cutler, who got beat up at Vanderbilt like crazy by all the big SEC schools, got sacked more than any quarterback in the league this year, took a beating with the Bears last year, only missed one start. I watched Deion Sanders, one of the biggest wimps to ever play defense, when it came to tackling, ripping him up, saying, well, I played with an MCL sprain. Torrey Holt, great receiver, well, I played. And Warren Sapp said, but you ain't Jay Cutler. You don't know what he's feeling. And I learned years ago, when players tell me as a writer, do not question how a player feels unless you've been in his shoes. And I have not been in Cutler's shoes, and I think it's an embarrassment to the NFL the way Cutler is being treated by a lot of the players, especially wimps like Deion Sanders. Now, I got another one here that I think is really cool about the Super Bowl. Ted Thompson played for the Oilers, special teams captain. He's the general manager. They have more players drafted on their team than any other team in the championship game. What do you think? He took such a beating when Favre left, and everybody blamed it on him. He actually offered Favre a chance to come back. When he was retired, Favre said no, and they said, okay, we're giving the reins to Aaron, and he said, go ahead and do it. And then he tried to get them to change their mind. Do you think he looks so stupid now as everybody said he was when Favre got traded to the Jets?
You know, he looks like a genius, and not so much just for letting Brett Favre go, but finding his replacement and when he found him. When you look at a quarterback replacing a legend, I can't think of anybody since Steve Young to replace a legend as successful as Aaron Rodgers has replaced Brett Favre. And Ted Thompson, he's the guy who brought him to the Green Bay Packers, and he was being proactive and thinking about the future. And I thought he did a great job selecting that quarterback. Aaron Rodgers fell. You know, we all thought he was going to get drafted higher than he was. Green Bay scooped him up. They molded him for the following 2-3 years, and now he's one of the better quarterbacks in the league. So it just lets you know that Ted Thompson really had vision. He had to be a visionary to see that far into the future and get this team ready for life after Brett. And look, life after Brett, they're in the Super Bowl.
The Steelers are dominant. They draft guys, too. They don't like to spend a lot of big money.
Yeah, when you talk about the Steelers, and I think it gets overlooked because this is a quarterback league and everybody wants to talk about the quarterback, but this is a great team. The casual fan doesn't realize how good of a team the Pittsburgh Steelers are. Don't forget, when Ben Roethlisberger was out for 4 games, they went 3-1. So it lets you know that his backups were ready and everybody else uplifted their game. And when I look at the championship game that got them to the Super Bowl, the first thing that steps in mind when I think of the offense was Rashawn Mendenhall. He's the one who set the tone for that game. He had over 120 yards rushing. Then you look at the defense, and the list of great players, not good players, but great players, goes on and on and on. They had 2 guys who had double-digit sacks, in Lamar Woodley and James Harrison. They have Troy Polamalu, who's a top 3 safety in the game. Casey Hampton, you don't hear much about him, but he plays the 3-4 nose tackle position the way it's supposed to be played. And the list just goes on and on, from Ike Taylor to Kiesel to anybody that's put on a Steeler uniform on that defense are great players. And they're underdogs underdogs going into the Super Bowl because I think people are just looking at Aaron Rodgers versus Ben Roethlisberger, and Aaron Rodgers had a better season stat-wise. But when you look at the whole team, I think you have to respect Pittsburgh as one of the greatest teams to play.
I'm stunned that the Packers are favored by 2.5. I'm stunned. They've only got 2 players on that team that have been in the Super Bowl. Steelers have 16 trying to win their 3rd ring. I think that experience is going to count for something. Maybe one reason they're favorites for our former Texans coach, Tom Capers, who's coaching the Packers defense, and he was an assistant defensive coach coaching the secondary with New England when the Packers, Mike McCarthy said to Ted Thompson, the GM, I think our personnel might be better for a 3-4. So they decided to go to a 3-4, and they hired Dom. He's done a fabulous job. I'm happy for him. He's one of the all-time class acts.
And speaking of doing fabulous jobs, you have to talk about Mike Tomlin. He's not as boisterous as Rex Ryan, so he doesn't get the headlines when he has his interviews. But Mike Tomlin is quietly and slowly putting together a Hall of Fame coaching career. He's already the youngest coach to ever win a Super Bowl. He's the youngest coach to go to his 2nd Super Bowl. And if he wins this, you really have to put him in the same group as the Bill Cowhers, another guy who replaced the legend. So when I look at Mike Tomlin and Aaron Rodgers, they have similarities in their successfully replacing legends, because I do believe Bill Cowhers a legend when you talk about Pittsburgh coaches. And with what he's done in the last 5-6 years has been amazing. He's always had a winning record. He's only missed the playoffs once, and his overall regular season coaching record is 43-21. This is a guy who's doing what they expected him to do, and if he could win a Super Bowl this Sunday, the Hall of Fame should be calling when his coaching career is done.
Tony Dungy, protege, only was a defensive coordinator 1 year at Minnesota when Dan Rooney hired him over his own guy he wanted, Russ Grimm. Tomlin's interview must have been fabulous because they were ready to hire Grimm, who was on their staff, and they switched to Tomlin. It was the right move. If the Steelers win, he'll join Washington's Joe Gibbs as the only coaches to win 2 Super Bowls in their first 4 seasons.